let's jump right into it. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're taking a fascinating and honestly a pretty unsettling dive into the archives. We're moving way past the safe, sterile halls of modern folklore conferences straight into a deeply eerie, unsolved mystery, one that connects whispered campfire ghost stories directly to the visceral, blood-soaked realities of ancient Nahuatl rituals. If you've ever wondered where our absolute darkest, most dread-inducing cultural narratives actually originate, well, you're in exactly the right place.
So we have to start with a core question, right? One that bridges a pretty massive gap. On one hand, you've got modern academics trying to cleanly define what a contemporary legend even is. But on the other hand, you have the terrifying, highly tangible reality of ancient human beliefs, where myths were absolutely not just stories you told in the dark. They were living, breathing entities. Like, what actually happens when a belief is so potent, so undeniable, that it literally demands flesh and blood? Let's trace how that evolves.
Part 1. The Riddle of Legends. Our story actually kicks off at a gathering of scholars in Sheffield, England, back in 1982. When you look at the archival texts, you see how these incredibly brilliant people spent years, literally a full 5 years of scholarly back and forth, just agonizing over terminology. They were heavily debating whether a modern rumor should be translated to the German term saga, or if it should just be called an urban belief tale. They're asking, does it have to be a structured narrative? Does the teller even have to believe it's true? And honestly, it reveals this very sterile, dry struggle. They were trying desperately to pack wild, organic human fears into these neat, predictable little academic boxes. Which brings us to Section 2, South Texas Spirits. To really grasp the grip these narratives have, we have to completely step out of the conference room. Down in South Texas and stretching across Mesoamerica, all that academic hand-wringing just stops. You've got familiar legends like La Llorona sitting right alongside modern urban rumors, like the pet in the oven or the vanishing hitchhiker. But lurking right beside them in the archives is an eerie, truly unsolved mystery. La Llorona's forgotten twin, Malintzin del Río. This is a weeping river spirit documented independently across 7 different Mexican and Guatemalan highland communities by folklorist Fernando Horcasitas way back in his 1953 UNAM fieldwork notebooks. And she's behaviorally distinct from La Llorona, yet follows almost identical encounter rules. You only hear her near moving water at dusk, she is always moving upstream, and her face is never, ever visible. Unlike La Llorona, there's no shared origin myth for her, no datable crime. She is just pure, unadulterated dread manifesting as community truth. Section 3. Translating the Nahuatl Pass. If we really want to find the DNA of this dread, we have to plunge backward in time. In an unpublished appendix held at the UNAM Archivo Historic, Horcasitas noted something genuinely chilling. Informants in these highland communities separated by 400 kilometers with zero documented contact, use the exact same ancient Nahuatl verb to describe her appearance, take shautlaotia. It translates to substitute for a face. Horcasitas flagged this lexical convergence as anthropologically inexplicable. And when we look at primary translations of Nahuatl rites, we see this intense literalism everywhere. Take a fresh green maize plant, a toctali. It wasn't just a metaphor for a good harvest. When they brought it into the home and decorated it, it literally became a teot, a god on earth. They didn't think they were representing the divine. They fully believed they were holding it right in their hands. Moving on to Section 4, Modern Rituals on the Mountain. And the thing is, the physical and the divine still crash into each other in terrifying ways today. Take this modern Chichimecaxotl ritual on the summit of Mount Xochicalco. The sensory details here are just incredibly eerie. Participants completely cover the altar with paper cutouts of beans, corn, and chilies. And then it gets highly visceral. The sponsoring family holds live chickens at a turkey, and they actually feed them sips of soda and beer. Once they've deliberately intoxicated these birds with luxury beverages, they take a pair of scissors and they cut their necks, which leads to this stark, brutal result. The bird's blood soaks into the paper cutouts and the earth. This isn't some abstract, silent prayer like a lot of us are used to. It is a literal, bloody feeding of the earth. The believers are directly, physically nourishing the divine forces that they rely on for their very survival. We actually see this tactile, defensive relationship to the physical world in much simpler customs, too. For instance, in Guatemalan myths, indigenous communities will strictly heat their water over smoldering fires, stating simply, water when it is cold is bad for our stomachs. It's this constant, everyday physical action, like carrying a bundle of dry twigs on literally every journey, taken with this quiet underlying paranoia to ward off unseen internal harm. The physical world and the spiritual world, they're completely inseparable.
Section 5. The human substitute, Ixiptula. Everything we've talked about builds to the single most harrowing concept in the archives. Remember that Nahuatl verb Horcasitas found for the faceless river spirit? Take Xiptlayotia, to substitute for a face. That comes directly from the absolute focal point of this explainer, the Ixiptla, a human substitute. Really think about the sheer terror of this for a second. A human being is selected, intricately decorated in the specific garments of the divine, and forced to act as a deity's actual physical presence on earth. And they do this knowing, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that they are destined for sacrifice.
This exact translation right from the source material captures such a chilling distinction. The text acknowledges the stark reality they verily make a tiurl, a god for themselves, but it is actually a human being whom they decorated. They aren't just honoring some distant deity up in the sky. No, they are forcing a living, breathing person to physically become that deity for the community. The community is manufacturing its own monster, its own god, out of human flesh. And the historical texts, they absolutely do not shy away from the human toll of this practice. We're given this devastating sensory detail of a doomed victim. As she acts as the Ixplictla, she is forced to dance. And the text explicitly notes, while dancing, she wept much and sighed. It is a horrific, deeply empathetic glimpse into the mind of someone who is forced to perform their own impending doom, fully aware of the nightmare ritual they are trapped inside. The ritual then concludes with this brutal, almost mechanical precision. She's conducted up to the top of the temple. Her chest is cut open, and then her throat is cut. And what the archives tell us is that she is literally just the head of a line. Right behind her comes a procession of other doomed human substitutes, all walking in file, all waiting for the exact same mechanical, bloody end just to satisfy the community's beliefs. When you look at this comparison, the contrast is just staggering. On one side, you have scholars in 1982 safely and sterilely debating terminology in a quiet, comfortable room. On the other, you have the visceral, blood-soaked reality of ancient human devotion, where a belief was so unbelievably powerful that it required a weeping, dancing human substitute to be torn open on top of a temple. Which brings us to the end of our dive into the archives today. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. We love to categorize our myths and our mysteries as just stories, just echoes in the dark. But history shows us that belief has a terrifying physical weight to it. If a story is powerful enough, what actually happens when a society decides that merely telling the tale isn't enough, and instead forces a living person to become the monster in the flesh? Definitely something to think about the next time you hear a whispered rumor. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.